I would like to call the Northwest Regional ESD Budget Committee Board meeting to order. Welcome, Budget Committee members, and those of you online, welcome. And staff, thank you for joining us tonight as well. We know it's been a long day for you, but thank you for being here. And I'm going to start off the meeting with the Board Secretary calling the roll of the Budget Committee.
Thank you, Board Chair. Jill Zerschmied.
Here.
Matt Kaufman.
Here.
Greg Kintz.
Here.
Jim Hellman.
Here.
Karen Twain.
Here.
Maureen Wolf.
Here.
Paul Jarrell.
Good evening. Here.
And it appears that Heidi Luquette, Shannon Emerson, Sheila Rowley, Alexander Flores, Jessica O'Donnell, and Ernest Stevens are absent.
I'm here.
Oh, is Shannon there? Apologies. Shannon
Yep, here.
and Ernest Stevens.
Here.
My apologies.
Thank you. Our next order of business is if there are any members of the public who wish to make a public comment, should have to submit a public comment request to the board secretary prior to the start of the meeting.
We have no public comment this evening.
Great, thank you so much for that. All right. Our next order of business is to review the agenda and the role of the Budget Committee, and I will hand that over to Superintendent Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome everybody. It's good to see you.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry, Director Stevens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see everybody. So we have some goals for this evening. You know, the first is, of course, for the Budget Committee in full to understand kind of the picture of where we are with our finances and our revenues, our expenditures, and how we are going to balance those things within the realities of Oregon's budget. And then we will seek to approve the approval of the proposed budget and the tax rates. And then after tonight, if the committee does approve the budget tonight, it will go to our school board for the school board approval of the budget, and that will occur in 2 weeks. And so if we can't get to those decision points tonight, we'll slow it down. And we have until June 30 for the board to take action. Okay. All right. So real fast, the agenda's here on the right. We'll walk you through it real fast. We are, after Jordan and I talk about the roles here of the committee, the roles a little bit more in depth, we will have the committee elect a committee chair for this evening. Then Jordan and myself will present the budget in the detail, in some of the detail in our slide deck that is posted there. You can see that they're linked to the agenda there. And just for those of you who can't navigate our website or want to navigate it and get everything in front of you tonight, you can see on the left there, there's our webpage, and you go to About, Board, and then you'll see down below is where things are posted. All right. So Jordan, are you advancing slides or?
Yeah, sorry, I had to hit the Tara.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent Goldman. So I'm going to go over the role of the committee real quick, and then we'll get into the meat of things. The Oregon local budget law applies to all city, special districts, school districts, ESDs. It's one law written for a whole bunch of agencies that operate very differently. And so we follow the same legal mandate. We match the number of budget committee members to board members. And this committee comes together to serve three essential functions. And without this process, we can't get permission to spend resources next year, and our agency would shut down on July 1st. So I very much appreciate all of you taking the time to be here so that we can continue that mission. But I do want to just call out one specific thing, the approval of the budget and tax rate. So at the very end, we will ask for your approval of this budget and the tax rate, and if you feel comfortable, you can make a motion to do so. The tax rate, though, is something that in school districts, I've found both in ESDs and school districts, really hangs people up, because when I go through all these doom and gloom slides about the state of the economy and legislative decisions that have been made that impact education, people naturally want to increase the tax rate. And then I say, I'm sorry, it's a permanent tax rate. And we don't have any ability to do that. And they say, well, then why do we have to do this performative exercise of approving the tax rate? And we do that because it's the law, is the short answer. But the other thing is that there are school districts, and I know we have a lot of representation from a couple of school districts here who have local option levies. Local option levies are an example of where a local school board and budget committee do have a taxing authority obligation to set that tax rate at or below what the voters approved it to be at. And then in special districts and cities and different things like that, their governing bodies can actually levy taxes against citizens. So when we get to that part, I know that there may be like an impulse to say, well, can't we just raise that rate and generate more resources for the ESD? And the answer to that question is unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you think about these things, no. And so tonight, the committee is asked to do a fiscal review. One of the main things that you all are looking at is, do the assumptions that we've made make sense? That doesn't mean that they're above reproach. It doesn't mean that reasonable people can't disagree, but is there at least a reasonable basis for the assumptions we've made? So as an example, if I come out here and I say, I think next year somebody's going to win the lottery and just donate the whole $600 million to us, and that's going to take care of all of our problems, it is your responsibility to say that is ludicrous and a dereliction of duty, and we are not approving that budget. You need to go back and rewrite this in a more constrained fashion to the resources you actually think we'll have available. So that's the fiscal review aspect of it. And then we have the public interface. As we heard, we do not have any public comments tonight, but it is an important function of this body to hear public comment when we do have citizens who would like to make public comment. And there will be another opportunity for that at the board's budget hearing. And then I already talked about approving the budget and tax rate.
Okay, there's actually, I think we got to do, this is just now for the next section that we're going to talk about. This,
okay.
Yeah,
So
we're ready to go to elections.
Right. Thank you so much for that great explanation. And now we're going to move to the next order of business, and that is the election of a budget committee chair. Then I would like to open up the nominations for budget committee chair. Are there any nominations? Go
I'd
ahead.
like to nominate Greg Kent. He's done it before.
Madam Chair, I'd like to nominate Doug Doherty.
Are there any further nominations? Anybody on the screen? Okay. Hearing no other nominations, the nominations are now closed. The following people have been nominated for chair of the Budget Committee. We have Greg Kentz and we have Doug Doherty. Do I have a motion to appoint a Budget Committee chair?
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve Doug Doherty as our Budget Committee Chair.
Second.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded that we nominate Doug Doherty for Budget Chair. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of Doug signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Congratulations, Doug. I now hand over this very important meeting to you.
Well, thank you. And let me start by going off script. And that is, Greg, you need to know how much I have looked up to you over the years when I was superintendent, You were involved with the ESD and your local board, and I just really appreciate all the leadership that you've shown this area and your own school district over the decades, and I really appreciate that. I also want to quickly go off script and just remind everybody what this is about. And this is about the children of this area. The children, and really the most needy of the children. And it is, and we serve their families. So as you are looking at all the numbers this evening, please remember that those are programs that serve the neediest children, and that this was a process that we had and we've had in place for a couple decades. And that is where each of the superintendents of Northwest Regional ESD, all 20 of them, are brought together by our superintendent, Dan Goldman. And they look at all the services that they need individually for their own school district, and they have to work together to come to consensus. And once again, our area has come to consensus over the local service plan that is before you this evening as part of this budget. And that was also something that each one of your school boards approved within the last 3 months. And so they had an opportunity to look through that, ask their questions, and they each approved that. And I'll wrap this piece up by just also reminding you that our budgets have been clean audits with our auditors for a number of years, and that not only do we have a strong fiscal team putting together this budget, but we also have one that is held up under audits, inspection. And so I really appreciate the fiscal team in doing that. Thank you. And with that, I would like to ask our superintendent, Dan Goldman, and CFO Jordan Ely to present the budget message and the proposed budget.
All right, thank you, Chair Doherty, and welcome back to the gavel. So I hope everybody had an opportunity. It is a big, long budget document, 292, I think, pages. Up front is a superintendent message from me and Jordan's executive summary, and I hope people had an opportunity to read through those. One of the, we're quoting ourselves here, which is, I don't know, like not.
Let's say I'm quoting you.
It's not very cool, but at Northwest, at our ESD, we believe budgets are more than financial plans. Budgets are moral documents, and they communicate what we value and prioritize and how we intend to meet the moment. And I really appreciate, Doug, your opening comments about kind of like what the ESD is. The ESD exists to fill in the gaps for school districts and meet the needs of the kids who are farthest from opportunity. And so our budget, I hope, is a reflection, we believe it is a reflection of those values, and are excited to talk about it with you tonight. All right, so there are a number of key strategic priorities that I wanted to call out to the committee as it evaluates our budget plan. The first is student achievement. And in our budget, you are seeing our attempts to, within the constraints that Doug also talked about with district approvals and the superintendent's needs and the district needs, our attempt to align our services to the state's new accountability framework, so we can assist school districts in making the progress that they are going to need to make under this new framework. So you'll see investments in early literacy, you will see new investments in mathematics, instructional coaching, you'll see investments in CTE and workforce development as examples of an assessment in general, an assessment department in general, and as examples of how we're aligning our resources. Behavioral health and prioritizing improved attendance, therapeutic environments such as our SEL schools and other direct intervention supports. Equity and belonging. Equity is a key value for us at our ESD, and we lean into that value quite heavily and believe that this is kind of the core reason why ESDs exist. And then career learning, you will see a big focus in our, if you look over periods of time in our, from prior budgets to now, a serious investment in career-based learning and workforce development for students. Hopefully you will also see and learn from Jordan throughout the evening that we are navigating fragile fiscal environments, just like every public entity in Oregon and probably nationally. We have inflationary pressures. We have personnel costs that are escalating, and escalating special education expenditures, and you'll hear that from school districts. Just think about what the ESD is all about. Like we are about, a big chunk of us is about meeting kids with special needs where they are and bringing them forward. So those kinds of discrepancies in funding for special education hit us particularly hard at our ESD. Managing uncertainty, proactive monitoring of state revenue forecasts, federal risk to ensure our long-term stability. And I would just point out that predicting federal risks right now is a very, very difficult thing to do. And so we have taken quite a conservative approach in our budget because a lot of our special revenues, which makes up, as you'll learn, the lion's share of what we do, are commingled with federal funds, especially in our large programs like early childhood special education and early intervention. And we are focused on excellence here at the ESD and being transparent. And so you'll see some investments in our financial squad, who also helps our districts, especially our small districts, with their finances and how they account for resources. So hopefully we're going to build some shared understanding. Jordan already walked you through kind of these other pieces, so no need to repeat. But we do want you to receive this message. We do want you to deliberate. We do want you to ask questions, and if appropriate, vote to approve this budget.
Okay, now for the doom and gloom portion of tonight's show. I'm kidding. As Superintendent Goldman said, we do have a relatively conservative budget here, but there are some things that we have in our control that make this much less gloomy, if you will. So we are going into the second year of a biennium. A lot of our resources come from grants here, which the state appropriates to us on a 50-50 split from year 1 to year 2, but it's a biennial allocation. And we're allowed to spend less than that in the first year if we would like to. And so we choose to do that. And we split on a 49-51 split here locally. And the way that the math works out on that is just over 4% growth from year 1 to year 2 when we spend that way. So in all of our grant funded programs, we have utilized our state resources on a 49-51 split. That gives us a natural 4% growth on those state revenues. We've increased our rates with districts by 4%. So that gives us that natural 4% growth on services that we're providing. What brings down our revenue growth a little bit is the federal funds, which we expect to be completely flat. We have received indications since developing this budget that there may be an up to 0.8% increase on federal funds. So that would still drag down our weighted average revenue, but it would at least be better than flat funding. So there is a very small possibility that we might see a marginal increase on IDEA funds this next year, but that is not certain. And so that goes into the broader context that we find ourselves in. And I think probably all of you know the state of geopolitics and different things like that, so I'm not going to get into that and opine on it. Only to say that the things that we have going on globally are affecting the revenue picture because it's affecting federal investments, not just in education, but in other aspects of our state budget that our state then has to figure out how to deal with. But it's also creating a lot of uncertainty on the expenditure side of the equation. So the majority of our spending happens with staffing, just like it does in your school districts. And so that's not the financial risk that we get introduced through all of this uncertainty isn't overwhelming. It's not a major part of our budget. But when we talk about those non-personnel expenses, we really don't have a great way of forecasting what that's going to look like next year, specifically on things related to energy. And so we have made assumptions in here for growth on both personnel expenses and non-personnel expenses. We are in the middle of bargaining both of our labor units, our licensed and our classified labor units. So the assumptions that I've made on expenditures are, I think they're informed and they're educated, but they are guesses. And I just want to be transparent about that any data science that I might have applied in the past to try to understand revenue and expenditure projections just doesn't really apply in the current scenario. And so we have the rising costs, both personnel and non-personnel. We've accounted for a rise. And so that's the question before the committee. Like, is the assumptions that I've made are they appropriate? Should I be forecasting catastrophe, or is this more sensible idea around what these might grow at the correct approach? So that's one aspect. Casualty and liability premiums for school districts across Oregon are up significantly. We find ourselves right at the average of 9.9%. That is the average increase across Oregon. Some entities are much higher than that, some are a little bit lower. We find ourselves right at the average. And so that has to do with the global insurance markets, which again are heavily impacted by all the different things that are happening, both with things our government is choosing to do, but also natural elements that okay, I'm just going to leave that alone. So these are systemic forces. We've been deliberate in our planning, and the idea behind the way that we've planned is that if we have to make reductions, we are doing that planfully. We're not doing that because next year we didn't plan on flat federal funding, and now all of a sudden we've got to cut a bunch of people. When we can handle reductions in the spring through just natural attrition, that is a much smoother way for us to deal with these kinds of things than having to RIF people mid-year. So the revenue forecasts are conservative. There's not a huge amount of revenue growth from year to year, but that was planful. So, oh, I got to advance the slide. Sorry. There we go. So we have some budget development principles. One of the things about how our budget process works, and I'm going to go into more detail on this in a couple slides, but our budget process really is driven by our administrators. So this is not a process of like Dan and I sitting in his office and coming up with how we should spend money. This is every single one of our department administrators who manages, in some cases, very large portfolios of grants and contracted services. We make our revenue estimates, and then we work together they work with their teams, and then the fiscal department works with them to translate that into a compliant document that's in front of all of you. So there's a whole bunch of sub-funds that you'll see throughout the entire document. We appropriate at the major fund level, but you will notice that every single sub-fund is balanced. So as we go through the budget process, every single department presents a balanced budget. These are the guiding principles that we have as we go through that. Of course, we want to maintain our core services. Just like in a school district, our mission is the children and families that we serve. And so we do the best we can. You will see that in some programs like our early intervention, early childhood special education, I believe we're up to 90% now of our spending in that department is on personnel. It might be 89%. But you know, we're beating the school district average of 83% on personnel. Like, we are very heavily focused on delivering service to kids and families. And then, of course, prioritizing financial stability. This is why we do that 49-51 split voluntarily, so that we see a natural growth progression over time, so that we're not adjusting our service levels every single year. And then use one-time funds responsibly. There are situations where we will make a decision. An example would be outdoor school for 25-26. We believed that there was a legitimate opportunity to seek a legislative change after that program's funding was cut. And so we made a conscious decision to invest in that program, ESD resources, so that our districts could still afford to participate in it, even though their grant funding got cut for that program, in the hopes that then funding would get restored in the short session. And in 26-27, we would have all of our staff still, and we'd be able to deliver the same program. Unfortunately, the legislature chose to make a different decision on that. And so now we have to make the reductions to the program. We've redesigned the program, and several positions had to be cut, and one of the sites that we serve students at had to be cut in order to accommodate that. But that is an example of when we might use one-time funds. We're not going to use it if we know that the legislature has said this program is no longer being funded. We're not just going to say, well, let's prolong the pain and we'll just use the one-time funds as long as we can. We only use them in very strategic opportunities. And then avoiding structural imbalance. Every single budget manager in the ESD was tasked with a budget that balanced to only their anticipated revenue with no use of fund balance. And then if they wanted to use fund balance, they had to make a case to the superintendent and the superintendent's cabinet as to why that is a prudent use of those one-time funds. Cool. All right, so this is what our budget development process looks like, and I just completely skipped over all of the LSP stuff, which is really like the meat of this. But But our budget process starts in November. The fiscal team builds a database. We project revenues and expenditures for the next year, and then we send those out to departments, and then departments work with their teams to develop budgets internally. And that happens mid-December through mid-February. And then all of those budget proposals get vetted by cabinet and signed off on. And then once we have that, right around spring break, fiscal starts preparing this compliance document in front of you. And I am going to talk about LSP, but I just wanted to focus on that top bar. The reason that we have to start the process so early and the reason that we have to have this document done so early is because our districts need to know what's going to happen with our rates, what services we're going to have available. So we can't just wait until like a legislative session is over and then start planning. The consequence of that, or the trade-off, if you will, is that we often have this document completely built before the legislature has finished its work. And so there are things in here that might not make sense from that perspective because we've asked you to appropriate a full amount. And because of the way the process works, we can't just go back in and just change that one thing. It throws the whole situation out of balance. So that's why that can happen at times. I don't think we have many instances of that this year. Things were pretty predictable for us this year, but that does happen. Concurrently with all of that, Dan is leading a process with our regional superintendents who unanimously approved our local service plan. And so this is the core services that we provide. It's also the menu of services that we provide that are available to districts. Once the regional superintendents agree on the local service plan, it then goes to the ESD board for approval. And then after the ESD board approves, it then goes out to all 20 school districts for approval. And this year, very happy to report that this was unanimously approved by all 20 of our districts this year. And then after all that's done, then the school districts select their services. And so remember, we've already budgeted. We've already made assumptions about what services districts are going to buy, which grants we're going to have, all of these different kinds of things. Way back in November and December is when we were doing all of those estimates. And of course, throughout the spring, we'll adjust to information if we have reliable information. But we are getting information from districts about their selections all the way until the end of April. And then, of course, we have the budget committee process in May. And so there's just a lot of interwoven things happening at the same time in this budget process that causes us to follow a certain progression. Is there something you want to say about that?
No.
Okay. All right. So this is, I think many of you may already know how funding to ESDs work. I didn't want to presuppose that that is the case. And so I wanted to kind of visualize how the state school fund works, because the state school fund is the only unrestricted resources we have in our budget. The vast majority of our resources are either contracts for services or grants and donations. All of those have restricted uses, even though fees for service are technically unrestricted. If we don't provide the service that people paid for, we're going to have a problem. So there's not a lot of discretion over what we do with our enterprise funds and our and there's no discretion over what we do with our special revenue funds. So we have our general fund, and when you first look at our budget document, it can actually look like we have a pretty large amount of unrestricted resources. So the way that the resources kind of flow to us is the state school fund gets appropriated for the entire state. 95.5% of that goes to school districts. That goes into the school district formula for the state school fund. 4.5% goes to ESDs. So for this next year, that's estimated to be $385 million that will go to the 19 ESDs across the state. The Northwest region gets about 17% of that revenue. We account for about 17.5% of the ADMW, but there's a whole bunch of complicated reasons why we get 17%. And so we're going to get about 17% of this anticipated revenue next year, which is $65.6 million. And so this is when I say it seems like we have a lot of unrestricted resources available to us. By statute, 90% of our state school fund must go to school districts in the form of direct services or cash in lieu of services. So the amount that we have left to operate the agency is $6.5 million. That is our total unrestricted resources from the state school fund. We also take an indirect rate on our grants. We're expecting over $100 million in grants this next year. And so even at a 4.5% indirect rate, that's a significant amount of resources. And then we have an internal service fee for all of our departments that are providing enterprise services. And so that gets us a little bit more revenue. But in our overall budget, the budget is $275 million is what we're asking you to appropriate. Right around 13 million is unrestricted, and that's what we use to run this entire agency. Okay, so this is a little flow chart of how funds flow into the ESD. And I was talking to Matt about this before, because this is what really hangs people up about how much purchasing power an ESD actually has and how much resource is allocated to ESDs. So down at the bottom, this is kind of picking up from that last slide. We have our state school fund gets received into the ESD. Then 90% of that goes out to our component school districts. So when we receive that into the state school fund, it goes into our general fund. From there, as part of the local service plan process, all of the superintendents agree on what our core services are going to be. And that takes about 13% of the 90% that needs to go to districts. And so that goes directly into a special revenue fund or an enterprise fund to pay for all of the instructional and technology services that we provide in the core. The other 87% is going to be transferred into a trust and agency fund. So already we've pulled that dollar in once and it's gone out once, and now it's going into something once, and then it's going to go out once when we spend it on the core services. But if it goes to trust and agency, then it's going to go into the trust and agency, it's going to go out of the trust and agency, either as us making a payment back to ourselves because the district asked to use those funds to pay for a service, or it's going to go into their bank account or their investment account, and then we're going to invoice them for services, and then that dollar is going to come back in again. The same dollar is going to be accounted for 3 times in our budget and in our actuals. So this is a $275 million budget. The actual spending power that the ESD has next year is around $135 million. The rest of it is all internal transfers.
I think
Any questions about that?
There is a question.
Yeah, I think we do have a question from Shannon online. Is ESD going to continue to work with Clatsop Community College?
Absolutely. Shannon, do you want to be a little bit more specific about your question? Because I was just in a meeting.
Yeah, I was asked because I've heard that the Clatsop Community College, I live in Clatsop County, so just to be honest, so I might have a little partialness to this. But I know that I'd heard that they were having some financial issues, and I'd heard that possibly the ESD might be stepping in to try to help them, and that might help you guys be able to help support us rural school districts with some CPE programs and stuff.
Yes, that is the goal, and that is our strategy. Right now, Clatsop Community College is the CTE coordination grant holder from the Department of Ed. And they have approached us to possibly take that work over for them. And we're looking at combining what we do in other counties with other community colleges so we can have a little bit more economy of scale. But yes, that is part of our plan.
I love it.
Okay.
So I approve. I can make a motion now if you'd like.
We'll wait just a little bit.
The chair says no, but we appreciate it.
Okay, let me know when you're ready.
There we go. All right, any other questions on that, like workflow? Okay, so I really wanted to focus on operating revenue. We do have a capital projects fund. We do not have any planned revenue or very little planned revenue. The only revenue that will go to our capital projects fund this year, if it happens, is when one of our programs asks us to do some kind of capital improvement on their facilities. Then we will transfer money from there into our capital projects fund and then execute on that project. So again, another place where the money will come in, go out, come back in, and then go back out. And so there's not a lot to talk about with that. And then the other non-operating fund is our trust and agency fund. Well, our debt service fund, which will pay the debt service for this facility we are sitting in. And then we have our trust and agency fund. So our trust and agency fund is where we hold resources on behalf of our districts. They are funds owned by the district. They are not funds we can spend. We are just holding them in a custodial capacity. And so when I talked earlier about how the money will come into the general fund and then we transfer it out, again, districts want to use a lot of those resources just to buy services from us. So rather than us send it out into their bank account and then send them an invoice and then a check back to us and all of this stuff, we'll put it into a trust and agency account. We call it service credits. and then they send a request to us to pay their invoices with service credits. And so when we take out those things and we look at what the resources that the agency has available to deliver services, this revenue mix that I'm showing you up here does include the districts buying the services back. So this is why I kind of wanted to pull these out and not have it be everything all inclusive, because then the trust and agency fund can make it look like money is moving twice. And so the money that we will actually spend this next year to provide services to students, families, and districts in our region, as you can see, is primarily special revenue. And in the special revenue fund, those are either grants, donations, or in some cases, districts will make a decision to enhance essentially a grant. So let's say we get a grant to provide speech language pathology services, and after we split that all out, a district is allocated half an FTE of SLP services. They might say to us, we want to use service credits to buy another half so we can have a full-time SLP in our elementary school, as an example. And so we do have some contracted services in our special revenue fund, but they are services that people are purchasing to go with another service. The one exception to that is our outdoor school fund, and that's just a relic of history, but our outdoor school is accounted for in the special revenue fund, even though that's a contract that we have with our districts. As far as our revenue mix goes, we have, in the current year, we have 80 grants and donations. So 80 different funding sources from grants. And then we have 327 unique statements of work with districts all across the state. So we serve districts in our region, of course, first and foremost, but we also provide services to districts all over the state. So that leaves us with a little over 400 unique funding sources that we need to keep track of and estimate as part of this budget process. And those show up in the form of local revenue. Whenever we are providing services to other districts, those will show up as local revenue in the budget. Transfers in will include, like, into the general fund, we have transfers in for our grant indirect rate and our internal service fees, things like that. State grants and contracts, I think, and federal grants probably speak for themselves as to what those are. And so then this is our operating expenditure overview, and this is by object. So all throughout the budget, you're going to see things by function, because that is the way that by law we are required to present this information to you all. But I find that most people do want to know, like, how much is salaries, how much is benefits, contracted services, different things like that. And as you can imagine, the labels on that bar chart looked really illegible. So I just have the bar chart up above, and then down below you can see the numbers that kind of support that bar chart. But if you stack the salaries and benefits together, you can see that's the vast majority of the spending that we do here. Okay, so this is our staffing mix in terms of where we will have staff. This is this is just permanent staffing. So we do have temporary staffing listed as FTE in the budget book. And again, that is because of a recommendation from the Department of Revenue about what a good faith estimate is. So on the budgeting side, the good faith estimate includes temporary positions. On the actual side, it does not, in terms of FTE. So I always try to have a slide that has, like, just the permanent FTE, and then throughout the budget, you will see it includes temporary FTE. But this is our staffing mix. 49% of our staff are licensed. And so that's classroom teachers, specialists, nurses, those kinds of positions. And then just about 43% are classified staff. And that would be classroom support, people helping out in the office, different functions like that, our facilities folks. And then 8% are administrators. And this is what our staffing mix has looked like over time. So back in 1920, the last, and this is budgeted. So these are not actuals. These are our budgeted figures over time. So the last time we budgeted pre-COVID, 50% of our staff were classified, 40% were licensed, and then 10% were administrative. Today, we're at 8.73% administrative, 39% classified, 52.5% licensed. And this really just reflects that as we received resources after the pandemic and as our agency has grown, our revenue has, I think, grown by 59% since 2019-20. So as an agency, we have grown a lot, and we have focused that investment on direct service to kids as much as we possibly can. So major programs that you'll see in our budget, special education support happens across a whole bunch of different funds. So this is all of our K-12 special education supports. If you want to know where those funds are getting spent, you can find those budgets in all of these different sub-funds. So as you're going through the document, you'll see that it says Fund 205, Fund 207, you know, all the different sub-fund numbers that we have. All of those numbers are K-12 special education services. And that is run by Kathy Jensen, that entire scope of work. And it is an extraordinary revenue mix that I won't go into. And then we have early learning, and I actually missed a couple of funds. Fund 204 is our primary EIECSE grant. Fund 208 is our early learning hub. Fund 294 is our EIECSE evaluations. Those are, so the contract that we get from the state pays for early intervention and early childhood special education services, but the state does not provide for districts to pay for evaluations. So districts have to pay for evaluations themselves. And so Fund 294 is where we account for districts paying us to do those evaluations and then us providing those evaluations. And so then workforce development is a new kind of arm of our agency, and that can be found in two different places, Fund 231 and Fund 531. And that is because workforce development is expected to have both grant revenue sources and contract revenue sources. So we have it in the enterprise fund and we also have it in the special revenue fund. And the different resource types will be accounted for in the two different places. And then our technology services. So a minute ago, I told you that we have 327 unique statements of work. 184 of those are just Stewart's department. So he's managing 184 unique contracts with districts to provide different technology services. Those are primarily found in Fund 540. ESD investment into technology and infrastructure can be found in Funds 150 and 450. Okay, so this is the approval and adoption process. The main reason I want you to see this is so that you know this is a critical step in the process is the budget committee approving the budget, reviewing the budget, providing your stamp of approval. But there is another opportunity for the board to hear from the public and to make adjustments to the budget after tonight. So if there are things in this budget that make you uncomfortable, that you think we've missed the mark on, I'm not a robot. I might get a little offended, but not offended enough that it should dissuade you from doing something. Like if something in here makes you uncomfortable, I would love to hear about it and talk it through, and if appropriate, make changes. And so the board will have an opportunity to make those changes here in a couple of weeks. And that is the end of the spiel.
All right. Thank you, Jordan. Really appreciate that information. And please ask any questions, although we're going to have to hold that for a second because by law, I have to ask Valerie, are there any, even though I know the answer, are there any public questions that we're aware of?
I've received none.
Thank you very much. Check that off our list. And moving on, it is now our time to ask questions and to deliberate. Is there anyone, I'm going to open up the floor so that you can discuss within the budget committee any questions that you might have for either Dan or Jordan or any of us. We're very happy to answer any questions that you might have. So the floor is yours, please. Greg.
Yes, you mentioned that you pass along, you said you grow at 4%. And that you pass that 4% on to the fees that you get from, did I get that correct? That what you charge the fees to the districts is also 4%?
Well, that is what we increased our rates by this year, was 4%. And so the estimation that we have for our expense growth is around 3.85%. And so to deal with the flat funding from the federal government, in order for our overall revenue picture to also grow by 3.85%, that's a weighted average. So we have some categories that are much higher and some categories where we're assuming a little bit lower. But in order for our revenue to grow 3.85%, we needed 4% from our state contract growth, and we were able to manage that internally, and so we did that. And then we need 4% from the services that we provide to districts.
So is there any historical record as far as the impact that makes on on schools such like ours, our small one. It's 4%, what does that do to us?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the state school fund?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do try really hard to do, Greg, is to match our rate growth to the state school fund growth. And so the state school fund is distributed to the districts on a 49-51 split as well. And so districts revenue, if ADM stayed the same and all these things that we know never happens, but like in an ideal fictitious world, the district's purchasing power would grow by 4% year over year. And then what we charge grows 4% year over year. And so in the first year of this biennium, the state school fund actually grew by 7%, but we still only did a 4% rate increase. We knew that districts were really struggling with the PERS rate increase. The amount that we charge to districts is relatively negligible when we look at the PERS situation, but we thought it was a thing that we could do to help out a little bit. We were able to hold that. We expected to do 4% rate increase in year one and then a 7% increase in year two is what we had talked to superintendents about. And instead we did 4% year one and we're doing 4% year two on most of our services. There are some services that we provide where our costs grew in such a way that we just could not maintain that 4% rate growth. But we do try to match it to the state school fund.
So Greg, all that being equal, what really hurts districts is when their enrollment drops and others doesn't in our region, right? So if you're in our region and your enrollment has grown, you're making out really well because we're keeping up with your state school fund payment on our rates and you're getting more money, right? You also have to serve more kids, but you're getting more money. When you're in a declining enrollment scenario, just like with their state school fund resources that you get from the state, it hurts just as much, right? Because our rates and our staffing costs and our utility rates go up just like everybody else's. But if you're in declining enrollment, you can't keep up.
Thank you.
That feeds really well into a question I had, which is, I know what is happening with enrollment in my district. What's happening at the ESD level with enrollment?
That is a great question. So it's all over the place, truthfully. We in our K-12 programs, we are seeing an increased level of need in some program areas, and we're seeing a lower level. And I don't know that a lower level of need is the right way to say it. Dan wants to say something.
Yeah, I think what Jill is really getting at is like, what's the declining enrollment scenario for our districts across the region?
For the aggregate of our districts in the region. Oh, okay. We are declining in enrollment, but we are declining at a slower rate than the rest of the state. So our portion of the state school fund is increasing over time.
Yeah. So we do have like Washington County districts are, by and large, the larger districts are declining enrollment. We do see in our more rural areas more increases in enrollment. So, and some of that is due to people moving out of the city or whatever, but others are opening different kinds of programs, and we're seeing a lot more entrepreneurial kind of programming from school districts that are doing like online schools, et cetera, et cetera. So one of our school districts, like Scappoose, doubled their, well, not double, their enrollment went up about 40% last year. Right. And then you have Tigard, right? Like, your budget well is a declining enrollment district, but it's not declining at 40%, right?
Yeah.
But in general, the state is declining enrollment. We're seeing less than the rest of the state, which actually means, all things being equal, a bigger chunk of the state school fund pie for the state of Oregon should flow into our region.
We can jump back a couple slides to the strategic initiatives. Or major investment in initiatives. The one thing I think might be, I would just be curious to see is we get the breakout between, fund type, but not necessarily a lot of reporting by each of the major initiatives. I guess we get the fund totals, but and obviously this is not a question for this year's budget, which is done and ready, but looking forward, getting some information around, what are we spending? What's the utilization like? How do we think about these initiatives and what we're doing and how successful is not really the word that I mean, but like how do we think about what we're doing in these spaces could be a really useful addition. That was a question that I had as I read through. Because I could see, in a few places like we list out the things that we're doing, and I know that, we're all involved in this, in setting these priorities, but seeing, what does FTE look like broken out by these priorities? What does spending look like broken out by these priorities could be helpful.
Yeah.
Just in wrapping, for somebody like me who's just trying to wrap their mind around, what is the ESD? What do they do?
Yeah.
How do I think about what the ESD does? And especially when, there is a little bit of, I don't know, what's the 3-card money? Is that where like all the money is kind of moving around quite a bit between when you just look at things at the fund level,
Yeah.
it can be hard to follow the bouncing ball a little bit. And having a little bit of reporting, a summary reporting around the strategic initiatives on a go forward basis, not for this time, would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Jordan, which one of these programs is having the greatest negative impact because of federal funds?
I would say it's a mix of what you would find in Fund 204 and 205. So Fund
Okay.
204 is early intervention, early childhood special education. Fund 205 is what we call regional inclusive services.
Yep.
And it really is just, so federal funds aren't a huge part of our budget.
Right.
But those two programs get millions of dollars of federal funds. And
Right.
so in other programs, it's not that the impact isn't felt in other programs, it's just a smaller amount of the overall revenue mix.
Yep.
In those two programs, it's millions of dollars. Across the biennium, it's, I don't know, I think $15, $16 million.
I think when you put the lens, Jim, of like, why does the ESD exist? We exist to serve school districts.
Yep.
When federal funds in Vernonia get cut for Title I,
Yep.
Title IIA, IDEA, right? You have less purchasing power. You still have the kids that need that level of service. You must provide it. It means you're going to take money from other parts of your budget to do that, right? It leaves you less to do things in your general ed program, those types of things. So I think it's an aggregate. Like federal funds cut out of EIECSE, they're
Right.
also cut out of regional inclusive services, like Jordan just said. Well, we use that resource to kind of backfill your purchasing on special ed.
Right.
So when we get less there, plus you're getting less in your district from the feds, it can be a combustible.
Right. And ultimately, somebody has the onus of covering some of those costs. I guess the reason I ask is being flat funded, knowing millions of dollars are flowing into early learning. What is going to be the impact, I think, long term? I mean, is that projected anywhere in here? I know it's just a 1-year budget, but as far as districts going down, or is that just too far out that?
Yeah, I don't feel like I have a reasonable basis for estimating
Yeah.
what the long-term impact looks like.
Okay.
I think November is going to be really important
Okay.
for the kids in our region.
Karen, please.
I reviewed the 267-page document. I may have missed a page or two, I'm not gonna lie. And I had made some notes and written down some questions. Some have been answered already, but I guess the two things I wanna ask or say is one, it's essentially been flat or actually gone down a bit in admin costs from 2019 to 2020. 26. And I understand the focus and the need to put it into particularly certified, and same thing, classified has gone down as well. I just, for next year, when we come together again, I want to think about that a little bit, because when you have that many people, if that's increased, that means you have fewer people being able to help manage, keep focus, all the things. And so we may need or want to bump that up. I have no need to change it right now, but I think it's a consideration for next time. So that's more of a comment than a question.
Thank you.
I think the only question I'll ask, even though I have a few, is about reserves. How much do we have, and is it in line with the districts, and, are we safe?
So for general fund reserves, this budget calls for about 10.7% total. So that's inclusive of contingency and unappropriated ending fund balance. Unappropriated ending fund balance is only around 5.5%, I think. And so I think for general fund reserves, I think that's appropriate. The thing about reserves in an ESD environment is that we use them completely differently than a school district. So the general fund, just like a school district, our general fund reserves are for, we had some sort of an emergency, unexpected expense thing, something like that. It's the exact things that you would have general fund reserves in a school district for. In the special revenue fund and the enterprise fund, there's a balance there between being able to manage cash flow and then having resources available for innovation. Because at the end of the day, one of the things that does make us very unique to a school district is that we do enterprising activities where we try to do innovative things that our districts need. We don't just do it for the sake of doing it. But like the workforce development stuff that we're standing up right now, that is because districts, community colleges, business leaders, pretty much ubiquitously, you're like, this is a hole that needs to be filled by somebody. And the only way we can do that is if we have resources, because we can't go to the districts and say, we have a great idea, just pay us and we'll do it. Like we gotta do some investment, some standing up, and then districts can invest. And so like we have a very limited amount, I would say, of resources available for that specific purpose, less than $2 million across the entire agency. And then special revenue fund reserves are actually a mix of actual dollars we have, but also just unutilized grant resources that get accounted for as a fund balance.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
I was just going to say that, like, last year, the board is very familiar. Last year, we had put out, if I remember correctly, $23 million on EIECSE and RISE before the state executed a contract with us and started reimbursing us for expenses. So when we talk about what our reserves need to be, it's very different than a school district, because if we don't have that cash sitting in our accounts, then we have to resort to short-term borrowing, which means interest expenses go out the door instead of going to services to kids.
That's exactly what I was asking.
Yeah.
So,
That was I just wanted to kind of make that school district-y. So like if you can imagine in your school district, like you didn't receive your state school fund payment until March, but you still have to pay your staff. Like, how are you going to do that? Like, you can't, right? So in our special revenue, that is a very common thing. So EIECSE is over 300 employees, and we didn't get resources at the beginning of the last biennium until February?
Yep, March was when we got our first
until
payment.
March. And so we had still to make payroll. So our special revenue funds must be able to handle that level of management from the Department of Education and Department of Administrative Services, really.
right, so given all that,
Is it healthy enough?
yeah,
Before you answer that, can I ask one more? Because it's also, so there's the timing issues, but if there was a change mid-year, who's on the hook? So if there was a dramatic change in federal funding or state funding mid-year in this process, like who, is it just passes through to districts? Or is the ESD potentially on the hook?
The state would be
for-
legally
yeah.
obligated up until the point that they notified us of a change. They would still have a legal obligation to pay us. The good news, if I can say that, with the federal government is that they pre-appropriate grant resources. So they've already sent the resources to the state. They would have to go through a very extreme process that I think is technically available to them, but it requires like significant congressional action for them to actually pull the money back from the state after they've sent it to them. So that's not as much of a financial risk for us. And where that becomes a problem for us is just like for anybody else. If they come to us and say, listen, we just, you've spent $20 million year to date, that's all we have available for you, we are furloughing everybody the next day. So we have the same kind of financial risk a district does in that kind of an extreme situation.
Just like the school district would have to reduce its workforce, stop providing a service, same for us.
Yeah, and I guess that's the concern, is that if we were, because reserves help to make that an orderly process, to give time to either find alternate solutions or if there was, a big change to special education funding, which is not doesn't seem outside the realm of possibility. Are we ready? What would be do we have a process, I guess, is the better way of saying, for addressing that?
Well, yes, we have processes, just like a school district has processes and contractual obligations, and the way that we work through those types of things. I think the fundamental question is, do we believe as the administration that we have enough in reserves to withstand what's before us in the next couple of years, right? So building reserves requires, as everybody understands, right? Building reserves requires disinvesting in other things. So it is a zero-sum game in our budget. So the more reserve we build, the less services, we can provide. Having said that, in that 2019, we've kind of benchmarked everything pre-COVID for all kinds of reasons. One is this my first year here at the ESD, and the other is pre-COVID, and it kind of gives us a sense of like, are we making progress for the board, with our administrative team? And our ending fund balance was 2.5% and on the way down. And so we've now built it back over a period of years to 10.5%. And we've done that through like the best management that we can, but we've grown, and we've also grown our services to school districts. I keep looking at Jim because he's a superintendent, he knows. But we've also grown our services to school districts and try to keep our costs, below the state school fund increase. So I think we're on the right path. We are obviously comfortable with the level of risk that we've put put here. And having said that, it's a really risky environment. And we are reliant on all kinds of public bodies to prioritize education for kids. And it could be that we don't have enough, and we would have to, do significant layoffs and all the things that you would see our surrounding school districts do at the same time.
Dan, I just really wanted to recognize and appreciate just how candid you are. I mean, increasing reserves, reducing services, and that's not just the ESD, that's school districts, that's everything. And that's the reality. You take the emotion out of this, as there's a set amount of money and there's a set amount of services and set amount of needs. So I appreciate that, especially right now with everybody going through what they're going through. Clarity goes a long way.
And I just, the only, sorry,
No, go ahead.
The only reason to kind of harp on this for a minute is that these are really expensive programs to set up, and you would hate to, so to put in a plug for reserving, and possibly even at the expense of some operational spending, is what you don't want to run, or hopefully we can help support the ESD in making sure we can sustain these programs and not have to unexpectedly cut in a way that then takes years to build back from cuts that you have to make.
Can I say one more thing about this that I was actually supposed to talk about earlier and I forgot? But you just reminded me. So when we talk about all of these, like 204 and 205, one of the challenges that we have is these are all reimbursement basis grants. So we have to spend the money and then we can request reimbursement. Like, we don't actually have capacity to build reserves on those programs. So when we talk about building reserves, what we mean is like building reserves in the general fund or increasing rates to districts by more so that we can start to build reserves in our enterprise fund. But we would have to build reserves either through our unrestricted state resources or through our enterprise resources. We wouldn't be able to build them from our grants. That is one of like the real risk tolerance things that when I came from a school district, I had to get, and Dan will tell you, it took me a bit to get my head around how this all works and how to try to manage it effectively.
Like, we can't save money in the EIECSC contract. We must expend all of it or it goes back to the state.
That, so again, sorry, now this is getting
very
off field,
great
but like,
questions.
and like, obviously this has nothing to do with the budget this year, but that as districts move key supports into the ESD, having those key supports funded in a way that makes it difficult to build reserves is a concern. Like that, and like that seems like something that we should have a conversation, or not we, but that there should be a conversation around that around the state, because like that, this is none of this stuff is optional stuff, and so if we ended up in a situation like that, as long as people know the risk that's there and are ready to step in and backfill it, that's one thing, but yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, so, I mean, as you say this, I just feel like I need to be the real Debbie Downer here to go. I can look at a ton of us around the room, 10,000 or 2009, 10, 11, we had a mid-year boom. We do not have the fund and the money, go figure it out, and it was horrible. So I think you can plan for reserves to a point, and then reality smacks you in the face and you can't plan that far. So that was a terrible time. It was horrible. And many of us around here lived through that. So I guess that's my only caveat, to say yes, be thoughtful, be planful, and then sometimes you can't plan that far.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And I'll say a lot of the things you're bringing up are things that we try to talk to our legislators about. Because the things like a reserve, people think that we're squirreling away, money that we're gonna give ourselves all, board, are gonna get raises and we're going to, so that's, it's taken on a negative connotation rather than, especially here at the ESD, we are literally floating the Oregon Department of Education. I mean, and who would have thought that an ESD has the resources to float the Oregon Department of Education, and we have to go down and beg them to pay something on a timely fashion because we have, received those funds. So, and we're putting out those funds because of a grant that we, and these are the services that are expecting. So this is something that our legislators need to better understand the flow. But my question is about, it seems to be there's also been some confusion around the state here when we talk about staffing. And are we using the right definitions? Because we have some folks, when you say FTE, when you say part-time, when you say, we have different definitions of things. My question when you were going through all of that is contractors. Where, and I know like enterprise, but where we account for contractors, because I am going to assume as a contractor myself, as an independent contractor, I have, when I sign contracts, they don't pay my medical, they don't pay unemployment, they don't pay. So I'm just wondering, I didn't hear you use the word contractor so much when you were talking about FTE.
Yeah, so contractors get accounted for alongside things like electricity and trash services and legal services and audit services, like it's all the different kinds of services just get rolled up into an object that starts with a 3. So anything that starts with 0, any object that starts with 03 is where you can find contractors. Now, if they're related to instruction, then they're going to be in the 310s. So the number would start with 031. That's where you're going to find instruction-related contractors, and then other types of contractors are going to start with a 038, so like auditors and lawyers and things like that. The way that our contracts read is that we have to try to fill the position with an employee. Any permanent position has to be filled with an employee, and we can only use a contractor if we can't fill it. And so in the budget, you actually don't see a lot of that. So we might spend 2.2 million probably next year on contractors, instruction-related contractors. You are not going to see that in the budget. You're going to see that as staff. Because where we budget for them is in the 100s and 200s, the salaries and benefits. But if we can't fill those roles and we have to go get a contractor, then we will account for it in the 300s. So in the budget, you won't really see too much of that.
Please.
Can I say one more thing, just for, because, our board meets every month. Where the board can really track that is every month you take action on our personnel action report, and those open vacancies, and you'll just see them sitting there. Those are typically, because the districts have already contracted with us for the services, those are places where you would typically see a contractor, where you see a speech pathologist that we're trying to recruit in Tillamook. That will be most likely filled with a contractor until we can recruit that person.
Another question I have, you talked earlier about our taxing rate that we have. Does the budget reflect anything that we see up or down with property taxes?
Yes, so I do assume more than a 3% growth. At a minimum, we know our property taxes, absent delinquency, are going to grow by 3% per year, because that's the delta between our real market values and our assessed values across our entire state are crazy at this point, like more than double on average, I believe. And so I generally account for 3.3 to 3.4% growth, and that's just based on linear regression. So over time, we've seen that our growth rate on property taxes it fluctuates anywhere from 3.1 to like 3.9%, but I think in this one I accounted for 3.4% growth on property taxes.
Please, of course.
Again, because our ESD, we forget how diverse in size in suburban versus rural, all the different things. When we're taking into account our overall budget, how do we make sure that this budget is safeguarding against our most vulnerable population? I mean, our students who are absolutely counting, how do we safeguard against that? And it's reflected in our budget.
I honestly don't think that's a question I can answer.
I'll give it my best shot. I mean, fundamentally, the services that the ESD largely provides are services for our school districts and communities that they can't provide on their own. Like they are heavily special education services. They're heavily like these gap programs that we just heard about from Clatsop, where the community college cannot provide a service because of its scale, and they need something with bigger scale to try to help it come together. Otherwise, kids don't get access to, CTE programming, right, in Clatskanie. And so our whole budget and everything we've just talked about is our best protection plan. Like this is our best, under the conditions that we have and the resources that we can forecast. Our best protection plan is the budget that you have before us. Like we've staffed these things to the degree that our districts have asked us to the greatest degree possible, and we're trying to protect the fund balances to the best degree possible but still providing a high degree of service. And that's kind of the best we can do. And then we advocate like the Dickens with legislators and people who can make some decisions that might prioritize kids who are furthest away from, general opportunity.
If I could add now, just because being superintendent for 18 years in this ESD, we've seen the up and down of the economy. The piece that doesn't get discussed enough is if we did not have an ESD to hold us together as small rural school districts, and even the large school districts do benefit from our economy of scale. Could you just briefly talk about how our economy of scale gives us an advantage, not only among school districts, but as an ESD in negotiating and things which you do on a daily basis?
Well, yeah. I mean, the easiest way to picture that is, I'm just going to look right at Vernonia, because Jim and, you know, you guys are sitting right in front of me, right? So, like Vernonia has a number of FTE, the people from the ESD who serve kids with special needs. They are not 1.0 people. They're like occupational therapy at 0.1.
Exactly.
Right? And the only way but that kid, or those few kids who need occupational therapy in Vernonia, Vernonia is required to serve them, and they morally and legally must serve these children, right? So in order for Jim to then have that service, he would have to be able to recruit on his own a 0.2 occupational therapist. We know that is almost impossible. It is impossible to do.
It is impossible.
Yeah.
And so what happens is in a consortium, right, we blend all these students, all the students with those types of needs together across a region, and then we can scale up a full position, and then we can actually have that person work. That's the most obvious example, right, that you're referencing. One thing that I'm sure you can see in our budget is, and Jordan talked about Stewart's in the IT department's work. We work with Multnomah ESD, and we've joined forces with Multnomah, and we have the Cascade Tech Alliance. It's the largest education service, technology service provider in the state of Oregon, bar none. And what that means is, like, we have fiber internet that runs into the middle of the coastal range and has redundancy. And so our districts get like an unbelievable amount of service on the technology side and network on the technology side that you just simply couldn't do I was a smaller district superintendent. You just can't do that stuff. Impossible. And so we're able to provide that kind of scale. And then on all kinds of purchase services like software and that kind of stuff, we just bring down, like right now, we just negotiated for the entire state of Oregon a lower price on these new interim assessments for districts all over the state, right? That was ESD work to negotiate those and procure those assessments at a lower rate, and you can get on your own.
Thank you. Nope, I definitely answered it. Thank you. Other questions?
Just that,
Please.
I didn't look close. Is the budget reflecting on some of the things, because Dan just brought up on some of the things that should be happening with the accountability bill?
Oh, goodness. Well, do you want to talk about the instructional aspect, and then I can talk about the operational?
Sure.
Briefly.
Yeah. So for instance, Becky, I think it's Fund 2. I'm doing funds from memory, so you will correct me on that. But you'll see in Fund 250, is 295?
Yep.
295. Those funds in particular are grant resources that we get. But that's where our districts pay into the core through the local service plan, and where we get our Student Success Act technical assistance resources. And then Fund 239 is our regional educator network. So our Educator Advancement Council. So we have those three resources. We blend those together, and then the districts, through their work with their SIA plans, prioritize their resources or prioritize their strategy. So, early literacy is ubiquitous. Everybody's working on early literacy. So we use a blend of those three funds to stand up our early literacy team. That's one example.
Yeah, ninth grade on track.
Ninth grade on track.
Attendance initiatives, all those pieces.
Attendance. Another example is Fund 231 and
531.
Thank you, 531. And that is our CTE and workforce development work. And so many of our school districts have selected CTE or AP dual credit as their local metric, and have asked for, obviously, our districts have asked us for a couple of years now to try to scale up supports in that area. So that's where you'll find that alignment. So those are some examples.
Great. Operationally?
Operationally, we have not accounted for the expected impacts from the chart of accounts change, which I know you and I have spoken about, and I assume is at least part of your question.
It is.
That
I missed the bottom line there.
We have volunteered with the state to be an early adopter of this new system if they're willing to provide us funding. Unfortunately, there were a lot of school districts who offered to be a part of it without getting funding. So I don't know that we'll be part of the early adopter process, which means that we will continue on the normally scheduled timeline, which has full implementation, I believe, in July of 29. We will have to hire at minimum another accountant. I think that is likely not the only impact. I haven't even really discussed this with our departments yet about the level of support that they're going to need there for coding transactions. I've estimated in the past, back of the napkin math, that it's going to cost the public education system over $80 million just to hire the accountants and bookkeepers that we need to keep track at the level of detail that the state wants us to keep track. If anybody is not familiar with what I'm talking about, it's a change of the chart of accounts that not only expands the number of elements that we have to report on, but just the complexity of it, because every single one of those elements changes every account code we use exponentially. And some of the things that they want us to account for example, are the revenue source. So we've talked a lot about EI, ECSE, and RISE tonight. Those are amalgamations of multiple revenue sources. So we call it one grant. We call it the EI, ECSE grant. But EI has 3 different funding sources and potentially a 4th if set aside gets used. And then ECSE also has 3, potentially 4. So we might have 8 different funding sources that we're using to fund a position in EI, ECSE. And what the state now wants us to do is everything in that code will be the same except for that revenue code. So that one person is now going to be split 8 times. Instead of it being one account code, that's 8 times for their salary and then 8 times for each of the 9 to 13 associated payroll costs that they have. That's for a position that's going to be in one place. But if this is the person that Dan just talked about that's serving Vernonia for part of their day, and then they're going over to Clatskanie for part of their day, and then over to Rainier for part of their day, we're going to do all of those codes, and we're going to do it over again for each school that they're going to. I don't even know functionally how to implement this, but it is going to require, I think what gets lost on us, potentially legislators and just the community in general, the office manager of a school, I think, is an unsung hero of public education. And that person is bandaging up a kid who skinned their knee. Then they're dealing with a non-custodial parent that's demanding to talk to their kid and pick them up. And then they're ordering lunch for the professional development that the principal wants to do that afternoon. And then they also do all the procurement for their school. That person is not going to be able to do this. So what we're talking about is a bookkeeper at every single elementary, middle, and high school in the entire state. And then we were talking about additional GL accountants and additional grant accountants in every single business office across the state.
Why did you?
No, we did not account for that in this
It needs to
budget.
be on the public record and it needs to be a part of our budget discussion because it is going to have an impact. It needs to be part of the discussion.
Chair Tim Truck, to directly answer your question, we did not include that in the budget. We don't expect to hire any accountants or bookkeepers this year. That is something that will have to be in future budgets if the state continues down this path.
What thoughtful questions. Do we have any other questions or anybody else have a comment?
I just wanted to, under my other question that I had coming in, I just wanted to underline what Karen said about the administrative staffing. I guess I'll be the unpopular person talking about reserves and administration as my concerns in the budget, but those are crucial. That I worry when I hear a lot of the discourse around the state, particularly around like, oh, well, we're going to protect frontline spending at, often at the expense of administration. And, I'll be the person to speak up for administrators and say that that's really crucial work to make sure that all of the things that we see up there, not only happen well and in an accountable fashion, but like you said, like when you want to do new innovative things, that often falls on administrators to manage that process. And so as we look, to the 4 priorities on the board, and I think we all want to see innovation and what's next in those spaces and good stewardship of those funds, just to underline, not this year, but next time, that would be something I would be interested in hearing a little more about. Are we well calibrated?
You want to come give that talk to our unions that we're bargaining with right now?
Yeah, I do think that that's another, you know, to say that's another conversation that we all need to start having statewide around, you know, if we want to see results in a lot of these places, like somebody has to administer the results. All right, now,
Appreciate that.
For the people in the back.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, then we will close the Budget Committee discussion portion of our agenda and move on to the proposed motion. And we have two motions. We have two draft proposed motions prepared by the administration, and they're attached to your agenda. We need a separate, we need two separate motions to address taxes and budget appropriations. And we'll start with a motion for budget appropriations, if we have a motion for that.
I have a question.
Please.
Does the person making the motion have to read the entire table?
Yes,
You
sorry.
can
Okay.
just say as presented.
Okay.
Oh, can I? Okay.
Legally, you can. I think our tradition has been that
Okay,
we read the
I
numbers.
just wanted to know what protocol was. I wasn't sure. All right. I move to approve the Northwest Regional Education Service District budget as presented for 2026-2027 as follows. General Fund, $75,659,271. Special Revenue Fund, $123,168,057. Debt Service Fund, $1,319,750. Capital Projects Fund, $2,649,086. Enterprise Fund, $13,204,254. Trust and Agency Fund, $59,467,229, for total appropriated funds of $275,467,647, with an unappropriated fund balance of $4 million.
Well done. Thank you. Thank you.
Russell's
Okay, we do have a second. Thank you.
Heavy lift.
Is there any other further discussion on this? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying yes.
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 Thank you, thank you. Those who are not in favor of the motion, please signify by saying no. Okay, thank you, and we're now going to move on to entertain a motion on the tax rate.
I can do that.
Thank you.
All right. I move to approve the tax rate of 0.1538 per thousand of assessed value to be assessed in support of the general fund.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any other further discussion on that, on the tax rate?
I'll just note, I wish we could increase it, but we can't.
Yeah, that's true. Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying yes.
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 Thank you, thank you. All those not in favor of the motion, please signify by saying no. All right. And with that, you do not have on your script, that you have passed it, but I guess you have with
Flip
that.
it over.
It is over. So anyway.
Left it hanging down. Sorry.
It's over.
Okay, so those are over. We will move on to, at this time, I'd like to thank the Budget Committee members. And I really appreciate your work in studying the information and asking thoughtful questions and deliberating over the many issues that not only are we facing now, but you're foreseeing that they may be possible issues in the future, and I appreciate those discussions. And with that, the committee's work is complete, and this approved budget will move on and move forward. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Look at that.
Yay.
There you go.
Right on
Thank
time.
you.
Right on time.
Becky, I loved your questions. I was like, I wish I was that
No,
fast. I'm like, she's bringing everything.
No,
that I
yeah,
want, right?
thank you for bringing that up.